Having a flashlight would have been very handy. It is funny how things can pop into your mind that you may not have thought about in a very long time, and that happened to me recently. In the summer of 1973, I had just completed my freshman year in college. One day I received a phone call from a friend of mine who asked if I would be interested in attending a rock concert that was scheduled for that upcoming weekend. He surprised me when he told me that the concert was to be held in upstate New York because we lived in Minnesota. The rock concert was being called Summer Jam 1973. I did not hesitate and told him, "Let's roll." The very next day, Red Ball, that was my friend's nickname, called me and asked if it would be all right if his little sister Ellen came along. I told him that would be fine, but asked him how that was going to work since we were going to be taking his car, which had no top and only 2 passenger seats. He said one person would have to sit sideways in the space behind the seats and that we could rotate doing so. I thought to myself, what the heck? That will just make it more fun. The trip would take us over 16 hours to complete, and we would be traveling over 1,000 miles. A couple of days later, we all got in our spots and off we went. Off we went without benefit of a flashlight. After driving for about 8 hours, we made it to South Bend, Indiana. We found a place to camp for the night and pitched our 2 tents. One thing that we'd not packed that would have come in very handy was to have a flashlight. Red Ball drove a Spitfire, and we used the headlights to illuminate our campsite as needed. The next morning we got back on the road and headed for our eventual destination, Watkins Glen, New York. Specifically, we were headed for the Watkins Glen racetrack where the concert was going to be held. We had read that the promoter had printed 150,000 tickets with the hopes that that many people would possibly show up. The ticket price was set for $10. Since there was time to spare, I wandered off to see what was going on in the general area. Even though the concert was not going to start until the next day, people were already claiming their spots on the ground inside the area set aside for the concert. I soon realized that if I could not figure out a way to claim a spot for myself, that I'd be watching the concert from the next zip code. The seeds of a plan were planted in my mind. The next morning it was clear that many more than 150,000 people were going to show up for this event. It was in the hours leading up to the concert, people just kept streaming into the concert area with no end in sight. In fact, by the time that the concert began, it was announced from the stage that the estimated attendance was over 600,000 people. After the event was over, the Guinness Book of World Records declared it to be the largest audience ever assembled for a rock concert in history. I figured that the way for me to get a prime spot was to wait until 5 o'clock in the morning while almost everyone was asleep and to quietly make my way up toward the front and close to the stage. I was able to do so, and as the sun rose, I was primed for a day of rock and roll. When it was time to leave, a flashlight would have been very handy. Besides a few questioning looks, my plan worked great. I was no more than 100 feet from the foot of the stage. When the concert was over, I made my way back to our campsite and hooked back up with Red Ball and Ellen, once again thinking how nice it would be if we'd brought a flashlight so that we could see as we packed up our gear.